It is the purification of the world from the sin it is immersed in. Hatred, ambition cause destructive wars.
Welcome to your Catholic Drive Time,
keeping you informed and inspired.
We love God, we ought to be able to talk about Him.
getting you started on your day.
With the latest in breaking news and information.
From the Vatican to the White House and everything in between.
It's serious, it's fun, it's your Catholic Drive Time.
Joining us right now is Michael Brown. Michael Brown, the author of a new book. He explores the prophecy in his latest book, intertwining current predictions with historical and supernatural revelations. Notably, an obscure enlightenment from Fatima's Lucia, a prolific Catholic author and journalist. Michael Brown offers a distinctive perspective on this explosive journey into the future. Good morning to you, Mr. Brown.
Good morning. Nice to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Praise be to God. It's good to have you on. Now, Mr. Brown, I have to admit, I'm 25 years old, and I've been told that you were made the rounds. I found out you were with Mother Angelica a lot, and I was first finding out about you a couple of days ago, and I was like, oh, this is crazy. So please, I've listened to a couple of your interviews where you talk about your past. Give me a brief introduction about yourself.
Well, yeah. I mean, for the last 30 years, I've been writing Catholic books, especially about the Virgin Mary and her apparitions around the world. I've been to more than 30 of her sites of apparition, obscure as well as famous. I was once a secular journalist. I was a journalist who broke the Love Canal toxic chemical case. I used to write for publications from everything from Reader's Digest to the Atlantic Monthly and New York Times Magazine. And my first major books in the Catholic realm were Witness, about a guy who had been in the Soviet Gulag for 20 years for being a Catholic activist, and most famously, I guess, for a book called The Final Hour. I spoke at more than 200 churches about that book and appeared pretty widely to discuss that. That had to do with the apparitions of the Virgin Mary since 1830 and their messages and their relation to current times, events, and trends. So this is kind of this new book, which is called Future Events, A Prophecy of Coming Times, is kind of a bookend, is kind of a follow-up to that 30 years later, bringing it up to speed as well as with new revelations.
So the interesting thing to me, because you brought up in the book about Sister Lucia's prophecy of an enlightenment, which is super interesting to me because I am a huge devotee to Our Lady of Fatima. I produce videos for America Needs Fatima, and I talk about the Fatima message all the time. And so this was very interesting to me. Tell me about this.
Well, it's thanks to the World Apostle of Fatima had published a book that was written by the nuns who lived with Sister Lucy some years back, nearly 10 years ago. Wrote this book called A Pathway Into the Gaze of Mary, and in the book, the nuns recounted how Sister Lucy was in agony in the 1940s, specifically 1944, because her bishop was demanding that she finally reveal what that third secret of Fatima was, and she didn't feel she had to go ahead yet from heaven, from Jesus. She was still getting apparitions of Jesus and Mary. And this anxiety actually caused her to get sick. She was sick with pleurisy, and she'd be on her knees just imploring heaven for some guidance. Does she do what the bishop wants? Who's she obedient to? And finally, in the midst of all of that, as she writes, if I can quote her, because she says it best, she said, while in prayer, she felt my spirit flooded by a light-filled mystery, which is God, and in him I saw and heard the point of the flame-like lance, which touches the axis of the earth, and the earth shakes. Mountains, cities, towns, and villages with their inhabitants are buried. The sea, rivers, and clouds leave their bounds. They overflow, flood, and drag with them into a whirlpool, houses and people in a number unable to be counted. It is the purification of the world from the sin it is immersed in. Hatred, ambition cause destructive wars. Now, quickly, for those who don't know what the third secret was, it involved a lance or spear, flaming spear, held by an angel and touching the earth as if to cause it to burst into flames. But that flame was quenched by a light coming from the Virgin Mary, the Virgin of Fatima. That's part of this third secret of Fatima, that image. But everyone kind of figured, I know I did, that it meant nuclear war, because Fatima had a lot to do with Russia. It had to do with the end of World War I, the beginning of World War II, and so forth. And when you talk about the world set afire, that's what we think about, nuclear warfare. But it was more than that, and it seems to have had to do also with great natural disasters, including geophysical events. And so that's the book starts from there, but then goes with much, much more than that into other alleged prophecies as well as church-approved ones, and discusses our current times.
Now, we're going to go to a quick break. When we come back, I do want to talk about some of the natural phenomena that seem to correspond with these prophecies. So we'll be right back with more with Michael Brown coming up right after this. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more Catholic Drive Time in just one moment. And welcome back to Catholic Drive Time. This is your host, Adrian Fonseca. Praise be to God. It's so good to be with you today. Just a reminder that coming up in just about 15 minutes, we're going to be having our 2023 Christmas Share-a-thon. A joy to the world. That's the theme. Joy to the world. What better thing to think about than joy on Christmas Day, right? So that's coming up. Make sure you are generous, because we are brought to you by you, as someone famous once said. So we'd be very grateful if you would do that. But joining us right now is Mr. Michael Brown. He's the author of Future Events, A Prophecy of Coming Times. Good morning to you, Mr. Brown.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
Praise be to God. It's good to have you on. Now, before we went to break, you were telling us about the situation with Our Lady of Fatima and Sister Lucia. Now, what's interesting to me is later on in your book, probably like the second half of it, you start getting into some of the things that are happening in the natural sphere that seem to play with what we've seen of the prophecies. Tell me about this.
Well, I think especially in the last 30 years or so, we've seen just increasing signs of the times, if you want to use that expression, which I think is a good one. It's an apt one. I mean, we take a look at the weather events. Hurricane Katrina. You know, the name Katrina means purification. I mean, we look at the other storms that have occurred elsewhere. It can be a blizzard. It can be something in Europe. It can be a tsunami in Asia that is unprecedented in our lifetimes. We're seeing a lot of smoke coming from various volcanoes. I was just over in Italy and Sicily and saw smoke coming from two different ones, Etna and Vesuvius. But anyway, there are a lot of natural events that seem to be intensifying all around us, and I think that we're going to continue to see that until it reaches a high point event. You can, years ago, I interviewed close to 100 meteorologists, climatologists, seismologists, volcanologists, even was at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena to interview astronomers on the asteroid threat. And I was doing a secular book on what could happen as far as future natural disasters. And, Adrian, it was amazing to me, because now this isn't in the Catholic prophecy realm back then, but it amazed me how virtually all of these scientists in whatever field were saying that we're overdue for major events, including earthquakes. We hear a lot of rumbling. So certainly places like Texas and Florida have seen their storms, but everywhere has, and everywhere will.
Very interesting, and I just want to... Was that a intentional pun? Talking about shakes and earthquakes at the same time? No, I'm just messing with you. I'm just joking. So it's interesting to me, though, because this idea of our Lord punishing through natural disaster, I mean, St. Augustine talks about in the City of God how God punishes the world with war, plague, and famine. And you think, okay, plague, and I'm thinking, okay, so that probably more corresponds with natural disaster. So a plague would be a natural disaster, and hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanoes, things like that would also be a natural disaster. And I think it's interesting to focus in because we kind of have this idea today. We don't really see death ever. And so this idea where a lot of the prophets, a lot of the visionaries, a lot of the mystics, Blessed Anna Maria Taiji, for instance, Venerable Kanori Mora, talks about a vast, vast majority of the wicked people and the good people along with them will be wiped out. But we saw that happen with the Black Plague, no?
Yes, we certainly did. That's a very important point because the time we're in right now is very similar to the High Middle Ages, which is when bubonic plague, the Great Black Death, occurred. And Adrian, it's sobering because I believe what we've seen with the COVID pandemic, at least 5 million who have died, probably many more than that. But at any rate, that's just a pre-sign, a precursor, and it's nothing compared to what happened with the Black Death. You had a situation there in the Middle Ages, and you also had climate changing all around you. You had weather events. You had great storms. But during the High Middle Ages, you had a situation where between, a quarter and a third of the people in Christian Europe and Asia and the Middle East died from that bubonic fever. So we can see that things can be a lot worse, but for the grace of God.
Yes, for sure. And I think people don't comprehend how many people that is because we don't have the scale in our minds, and we're like, we hear, oh, God's going to punish the world and the majority of people are going to die, and people are like, that's crazy. That could never happen. But those things have happened in the past, and people forget the Black Plague was something that re-emerged over and over again. It was cleansed the earth multiple times throughout time, and it was a very concerning situation. You wanted to say something about that, Mr. Brown?
Well, Adrian, if it was a third, if it was a quarter of the people like it was during the Black Death, you're talking 86 million in the United States alone dying. If it was a third, you're talking 113 million. So, a lot worse can happen. And if we don't get our act together, if we don't get off all of this cultural craziness and all of this warfare that's going on spiritually and in our society, if we don't get away from all the sin, these things are going to transpire.
Now, side question, and I didn't see this in your book, but I haven't finished it yet, so maybe it's in here. But I remember when I was younger, my mom telling me about a prophecy, and maybe you've heard of this. Maybe you can cite this for me. And I've searched for it, and I cannot find it anywhere, about a prophecy having to do with the West Coast of the United States. I remember it, and maybe I'm misremembering. It was a long time ago, where something about California being invaded by the Oriental, or California being wiped off the map, or something like that. Are you familiar with that at all?
Well, there have been a number to that, that speak to that, certainly. And one of the most well-known one had to do with a person who had a near-death experience and saw the future in that regard. Saw natural disasters weakening the United States, which then opened a way for invasions by Russians, Muslims, and Chinese, and especially Chinese. So, yes, we certainly have seen that, and people have been predicting things for California. Some of it is obvious because it's such a earthquake-prone part of the country. But also, it's the locus for a lot of the waywardness that we've seen in the last half a century.
Right, for sure, and I mean, St. Paul tells us that God will punish people by giving them up to their passions, and I don't know a better example of that than San Francisco and California as a whole, as an example of people being given up over to their passions and men lying with men, and the craziness of transgenderism, which leads me to another point. Do you think that the rapid immorality that's inconceivable at a time in 1917, Our Lady of Fatima told the children that people went to hell more for sins against purity than any other sins. And I'm looking at the world today, and I'm like, 1917 looks like a paradise in comparison.
It's amazing, and that's another very important point that you bring up, because it was nothing compared to the immorality that's going on right now. It's crazy. We're committing the high sin of Lucifer because we, as a society, especially our scientific realm, is aspiring to the throne of the Creator. That's the high sin, when Satan tried to become equal to God, to ascend to the throne. And boy, that will unleash all kinds of things. It is unleashing all kinds of things. I mean, I've suffered through COVID. My wife is suffering from it right now. So many people have suffered through so many things, and it doesn't have to be physical. Look at the angst that's going on right now, the psychological aberrations, and just the waywardness, the disorientation, as was stated at Fatima, that there is a diabolic disorientation, and it's all around us. It's very, very, very plain. Right is suddenly wrong, and wrong is suddenly right.
Now, I think so. Here's my opinion, and I want to get your opinion on this. My opinion is we are not living in the end times, the time of the second coming of Christ. I don't believe we're in that time. I believe that we are on the cusp of the great chastisement that Our Lady of Fatima predicted. And I think that's going to happen probably before 2030, in my opinion. I think I used to say longer, and it seems things are speeding up. That's my opinion. What say you, Mr. Brown? Where are we on the scale of things?
It's pretty much right in line with that. I tend to believe a prophecy. We call it the 1990 prophecy. It was a anonymous locution. It's not approved by the church. But some of it's already come to be, and it ended that prophecy by saying, quote, "The world will not end but change." And it also had in that prophecy, it said that how mankind responds to evil will determine the extent, length, and severity of the first chastisements. I'm quoting it directly. These chastisements will differ according to regions, and like the great evil, will not always or usually be immediately noticeable for what they are. In the period also, will be a warning that involves not fire from the sky, but fear of fire from the sky and strange, loud rumblings. And then it says, soon a world will not be the world you know. I am not speaking putatively, this is the Lord. I am not speaking of a world that will end, but of a world that will change. And it says, soon a world will not be the world you know. I am not speaking of a barren world or one depopulated, but of the end of your technological era. And I've often told people since 1991, when I've been speaking publicly about this, that I expect these various secrets elsewhere, other apparitions, to unfold by around 2035 or so. So we're kind of right on the same page here, Adrian.
Well, I think that's really interesting because I've been talking about this transhumanist ideology, and I'm thinking there's no way God allows this to come to fruition in its entirety. And what you're saying right there just lines up right with what I'm thinking. Last minute we have with you, I talk a lot about the reign of Mary and how we have the hope and the resurrection, of course, but even more concretely, in the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. Lead me on a message of hope.
Well, there is tremendous hope. First of all, there's heaven. We all live forever, and it's our real home. We have to stop looking to the right and to the left as far as politics and culture so much. We have to see evil and get rid of it. That's for sure. But we have to look up more than to the right or left. And I'd like to mention, Adrian, if I may, that we have a daily website of news called spiritdaily.com, in which we have a lot of these signs of the times and so forth that were put into the current book, into future events. And yes, we live forever.
Check it out. spiritdaily.com. Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. We'll have to have you back on. I would love to talk to you about this Esperanza person. I never really heard of them before, but God bless you. God love you, Mr. Brown.
God bless you. Thank you.
And that's going to do it. We're going to go into our Christmas share-a-thon. Please be generous. We'll be back on Monday morning, 6 a.m. Central, 7 Eastern. God love you.